segment 2 of SAC TV's exclusive interview with David Watts Barton, and we were talking about leading up to your work at the Bee. You gave us a little bit of background in part 1 about how you were a writer for all these different indie publications. So how about when you finally got to the Bee, what was the magic words that got you that gig?
I think, so my long wind-up to telling that story on the first segment was that I was writing for this rock and roll news magazine with this guy, and I ended up going traveling. I went to India, and I gave him my job. I basically recommended him for my job as I was leaving.
Okay.
And so they hired him, and when he got hired on, he went to the Tower office, and he started something called Tower Pulse, which was this magazine.
I knew Pulse.
So he asked me to start writing for the Tower Pulse, and so I started writing something. And then actually my ex-wife, my wife at the time, suggested that I send my clips to the Bee. And it never really occurred to me, frankly. I was a union paper boy.
Okay, I was too.
Okay.
Union and Bee. Actually.
Union and Bee, okay. Union route was a lot harder because it was like every 5 houses, whereas the Bee was every house. I mean, there were like 3 Bee routes within one union route. So that was a workout every morning.
Yeah.
But and it was a morning paper too, which really sucked.
Right.
But I did that for a year. Anyway, so I sent some stuff to the Bee, and they liked it, and they asked me to write a review, and I did a review. My first review was of the Ramones at Sac State.
Oh, cool.
And then Berlin at the Crest, and I don't remember what the other ones were. And then after a very short few, they said, we would love to hire you. You're going to have to hang around for a year or so and just freelance. I was like, okay. So I freelanced, and then I became the pop music critic, and I was the first full-time pop music critic that they had.
Wow.
And
that was 82?
82.
Yeah.
They hired me in 85. I started in 82, and they hired me in 83. No, 85. So anyway, and then I did that.
And at that time, I was getting my start in radio at Quad, so
Right.
I was on the air talking while you were writing.
And Quad was the only cool radio station in town, basically.
Yeah, well,
Quad was originally a quadraphonic radio station.
That's right.
That was
That's
the deal, right?
four
Remember
signals.
We were talking about Pink Floyd before.
Yeah.
That was their deal.
That's right.
Quadraphonic never quite worked that well.
That's right.
I actually knew somebody who had a quadraphonic system, though.
One person out of thousands.
Yeah. And but anyway, I mean, working at Tower was great. Tower was like, even before the Bee, Tower was like such a grounding, and you learned so much working at Tower because you'd have all these people come in. And I remember one time in Sacramento, we always thought Sacramento was so off the beaten path.
Yeah.
But there were certain people who come through, and Tower was interesting in that way because Tower sort of attracted people. And there was this guy who came in, and a friend of mine who worked at the store was dating a philosophy professor at Sac State. And this old German guy came in the store one time, and she said, "Do you know who that is?" And I'm like, "No." She said, "That's Karl Popper." And I was like, "Who's Karl Popper?" And she said, "He's one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century." And I was like, "What? He's at Tower on Watt Avenue?" And he was, and I still think about that, and I haven't seen her for 30 years probably, and I wonder still, it's like, was that really Karl Popper who came into the Bee? But she would have known, because she was dating a philosopher, right? So anyway, Tower was great because it wasn't just Tower Records, it was Tower Books too,
Yeah.
and people would come in, you just learned so much from the people who came in. I guess that's my point.
Yeah.
But anyway, then I started writing for the Bee, and the thing is that at that point, Sacramento, we had the amphitheater at Cal Expo, which was nothing special, but we were on the tour circuit because Bill Graham Presents presented a lot of shows up here, and we used to have those 3-night Grateful Dead stands, and it would just turn into this big circus, and it was when rock and roll, it was the peak of rock music, was the 70s and 80s, and in the 80s, it was such a big money thing. And you would have people come through. I mean, Dire Straits and Phil Collins,
I went to
all those shows came through. And I was at the last show there, which I believe was, which was the, I know it was at the show, but I think it was the last show, which was Counting Crows in 1997, which was still a great show. But I remember Huey Lewis and the News played 3 nights there in a 14,000 seat place. I mean, that's how big things were back then. It was just a different scale. It was before downloading. Everybody was buying records. It was just, people were selling. Def Leppard did like 8 million selling albums in a row,
Mm-hmm.
And now you get a 4 million selling album and you're like the biggest thing ever,
Right.
I mean, even a Madonna album doesn't sell more than a couple million copies.
Right. Although downloads, there are a few singles that have high
Right.
level of downloads.
But that's what it was. But that's what it was like before we came along. It was like
Yeah.
the singles were the big deal until
Yeah.
1967, and then albums sort of crossed
Sgt.
over and
Pepper.
became exactly the Doors and all those
Hendrix.
guys. Hendrix and Pink Floyd and Jefferson
Yeah.
Airplane, all that stuff came along, and suddenly albums were the big deal.
Yeah. So we're going to get into more about the aspects of music and writing, the combination, in our next segment with David Watts Barton.